The New Orleans Saints stand their toughest task tonight up against the Baltimore Ravens. Why Pete Werner could be the key to limiting Lamar Jackson. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Just pick 2 to 5 players and whether or not they'll come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projections. And with that, you can win up to 10 times your money back from your entry. First-time users can also receive a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. Just use the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. As always, y'all, appreciate you for joining us for another episode here on Locked On Saints. On today's episode, we're going to talk about how the New Orleans Saints need Andy Dalton's best day that he's had so far this season in order to get a win tonight against the Baltimore Ravens. We're also going to take a look at the defensive wrinkles that the New Orleans Saints could fold in. But first, how the New Orleans Saints should defend Lamar Jackson. They have their toughest task of the season on the way in trying to do something that has been an issue for this New Orleans Saints defense for years and years and years, which is limit mobile quarterbacks. And as Cam Jordan said the other day, there are mobile quarterbacks, and then there is Lamar Jackson. He's in a class of his own. And so there are a couple of different ways that the Saints can go about this, but I'm going to tell you kind of my favorite way that I think that they should go about it. We'll also add in some defensive wrinkles that they can throw in because you're not going to play one thing the entire time. What we know so far when it comes to the New Orleans Saints is that they have been a very zone-heavy team so far this season. They like to play press man on the outside, get hands on the receiver, yes, but they've still been majority a zone defense on the back end. So you look at a lot of cover 3 with 3 safeties deep and a lot of, or not necessarily 3 safeties, but 3 defenders deep, one taking away the middle of the field and then one on either side, sort of splitting the field into thirds in terms of the deep area of the field. And then the other would be a lot of cover 4, same thing, but then you break down the field into quarters as opposed to into thirds. So that's where the Saints have been so far this season. 68% of their defense has been played in zone. About 27% has been in man. At least about 5% for some of the other things, like a little bit of mix here and there, some goal line situations, things like that. So zone coverage with safeties as wide ends is something we don't really see the New Orleans Saints do very often. So what they could do, and what I think they should do tonight, is lean into sort of their cover 3 situation, but pre-snap, bring 2 safeties. So this would mean playing maybe 3 safeties here. So that could be, you're going to have Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu on the field at all times. But then maybe you're mixing in some Justin Evans as opposed to Chris Harris Jr., or you're mixing in PJ Williams if he's good to go as opposed to Chris Harris Jr. We'll see if he gets elevated from or activated from injured reserve today before the game. So what you're doing then is putting those 2 safeties on the far outside of the offensive line, not necessarily all, or defensive line, not necessarily all the way down the line of scrimmage, but just kind of what you would call just outside the box, right? So what that does is that it allows you to play run first and then be able to drop one of those safeties back or have those safeties invert into flats while you have the other 2 corners on the opposite side take the third of the field, and then you have on the outside thirds of the field, and then you have Marcus May in the middle. It's all convoluted, but there's a way to sort of invert that so that those 2 safeties are playing the run first. Now, the issue becomes whose responsibility is it on play action? Whose responsibility is it off of the line to hold for like cutbacks as well as playing quarterback and things like that? We'll hear Dennis Allen talk about that here in just a moment. But here's another way that the Saints could go about this. As opposed to going to the 3 safety sets and then potentially forcing a guy out on the field before he's ready, like PJ Williams, or having a guy like Justin Evans on the outside there who loves to hit. But the disadvantage here is that you've got like Tyrann Mathieu and Justin Evans who have been dealing with some missed tackle issues early on in the season. Things have gotten better here over the past few games, but this is Lamar Jackson, who is still a 230-pound quarterback. Like, he's not a small guy, right? So the disadvantage is when you're kind of missing tackles over on the outside. So what about Pete Werner? Could Pete Werner be one of those guys to kind of play that wide end, leave Demario Davis by himself in the middle of the field, bring Pete Werner over toward the outside as a wide end, have Tyrann Mathieu play down as a wide end, which I do with him all the time, still have your three corners and then your safety up over the top. Then you can drop Tyrann Mathieu from the line of scrimmage. You can drop each corner from each side, and then you can still defend the way that you want to defend over on the back end. But you have these two guys that are very athletic in terms of Tyrann Mathieu and Pete Werner, who's still leading the NFL right now in solo tackles. So he's been your most solid tackler on the team. Those are the guys right now that then would play run first. Watch to see what Lamar Jackson does. If he starts to drop back, then you drop back and you bail out. If it's a run play, you're going to, play the run anyway, but then you have your responsibilities if it's an RPO or a zone read or a power zone read, things like that, to where you can kind of see what it is develop in front of you and then be able to drop back. The other advantage to playing zone is that everyone's eyes are on Lamar Jackson, right? The entire defense is watching Lamar Jackson, as opposed to man, where everyone turns their back to Lamar Jackson because they're trailing their receivers. So that's the other piece that works out really well for you, is that not only it eliminates the need for a spy, basically, because not just one player is spying Lamar Jackson, the entire defense is spying Lamar Jackson, which could work in your advantage as well. The Ravens so far this season have only had 2 passing touchdowns versus zone. They've thrown 3 interceptions there. The Saints have played, like we mentioned, a ton of zone as well. So it also keeps you doing what it is that the Ravens have struggled most against, while doing what it is that you have done for most of this season. And as we discussed Pete Werner, here's what Ryan Nielsen, Saints co-defensive coordinator, had to say when I asked him during his weekly press conference about why it's so important and what it does for a defense to have as much athleticism at the second level as the Saints have.
You have linebackers that can run and hit. All right. They erase mistakes. And so if the guy makes a mistake up front, he got, second level, third level, come over the top and make the play for him, And so when you don't have as athletic second level players, and thankfully we do, Demario and Peter are athletic guys, they can erase a mistake if we make a mistake up front, or, so a lot of times, some of the plays that Pete makes is, guy got out of a gap, Pete just comes over the top and makes the play, and, everybody goes, oh, you guys draw it up pretty nice. Well, no, you guys made a nice play, so that's some of it out there.
So you hear the praise there for both Demario Davis and Pete Werner, erasing mistakes, taking away things. Doesn't that sound like exactly what it is that the Saints need from Demario Davis and Pete Werner during this game, in case there is some play that ends up breaking wide open for Lamar Jackson on the defensive line? You want to make sure you have depth on your defense so that you have a second level and a third level to stop them. You look at the Miami Dolphins, one of the things that they struggled with Lamar Jackson against early on this season was that Lamar Jackson breaks through the line of scrimmage and there's nobody deep. There's nobody up high. So he gets through one level of the defense and then all of a sudden he's untouched, headed to the end zone. Those are things that the Saints want to be able to avoid. That's why maybe this wide end system and getting Pete Werner specifically involved in that, get your most athletic tacklers out on the perimeter, but then also gives you an opportunity to be able to force everything back into the middle so that Lamar Jackson doesn't get to the sideline after breaking through just one level of your defense. Now, the Saints are not going to be able to just sit back comfortably and play zone defense this entire game, right? So what are some of the elements that they could also mix in to help limit Lamar Jackson? We'll break that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, though, I got an opportunity to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Daily fantasy made easy, and in my opinion, the way that it should be. So if you looked at last week's games or yesterday's games, the Sunday games, and you ended up saying, hey, Joe Mixon's going to run for more than his Prize Picks projection, which was kind of in the 60s. Well, you didn't just win that, you cleared it. Maybe you took him to score more than 1.5 touchdowns or more than a half a touchdown. Well, you cleared that as well, as the Cincinnati Bengals absolutely embarrassed the Carolina Panthers. And if you chose more or less, or if you chose more 0.1 game-winning drives for Tom Brady, then you were probably simultaneously happy and disappointed. in the way that game ended up. But it's that simple. You pick 2 to 5 players, whether or not they come in at more or less than their prize picks projection. Get those right, and you can get 10 times your money back from your entry. They've got that for the NFL, men's and women's college basketball, NBA, WNBA, MLB, and so much more. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com today so you can start playing daily fantasy sports. First-time users are going to receive a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks is going to give you $100. You deposit $50, they're going to give you $50. It's that simple. Don't forget, it's promo code LOCKEDON to sign up today for your instant deposit match of up to $100 at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. So the New Orleans Saints have a tall task ahead of them in limiting Baltimore Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, trying to get to 4-5 on the season. Can they get it done? We talked about sort of where they can start, but what about some of the wrinkles they can add in to help them out along the way? Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today to, of course, check out all of the news around the world of sports in around 22 minutes, bringing you the local insight in the ways that only Locked On experts can. You can find that on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, don't forget to go and check out Caroline Fenton over at Locked On LSU, because LSU with a huge win over Alabama this weekend. You're going to want to go and check out her show as well. Okay, so one of the key things that the Saints are going to try to do when it comes to Lamar Jackson is make him play in the pocket. Now, ideally, you're making him play uncomfortably in the pocket, but make him play from the pocket so he doesn't get outside one way or another, or take those rushes right up the middle, those sort of inverted zone reads that they like to run, to where he could hand it off to the running back for the running back to go to the outside and then him go through the inside, which is kind of an inverse of what you would usually do in a zone read, to where you're faking to the running back to go up the middle, and then if you pull, you're going around toward the outside. So it's a challenge to stop that and make that happen, but that's going to be a big part of what it is that the Saints are going to want to do. Make him play from the pocket, tackle at the catch point, because the Ravens have a lot of yards after catch ability, even without Rashad Bateman on the field. Devin Duvernay can still be that guy. Deshaun Jackson can still be that guy. James Prochet can still be that guy. So you're going to want to watch out for that. And then, of course, maintain discipline. This is a big one, especially when you're eye focused, as well as is being challenged, and especially when you're put in conflict situations. Let's listen to Dennis Allen highlight why it's so hard to defend a guy like Lamar Jackson, and some examples of what some of those conflict situations for defenders might look like.
Look, we see the same thing, right? Like every week I get asked questions about Taysom Hill and why is that so effective? And because when the guy that's standing back there with the ball, when he can run the football, it makes it challenging, because you're usually putting somebody in some sort of a two-gap conflict. And so that's what makes it so challenging. Whether you're, crashing down with an end and trying to come back with a linebacker, or whether you're, having an end, play cut back end quarterback. I mean, there's a lot of different elements that go along to that. And usually these teams that run this type of offense are usually putting, two elements on one player, and that's what makes it challenging.
So a couple of key examples that he gave there, one of which being the linebacker filling in from the second level. That sounds familiar from what we just talked about, right? Doesn't it sound like something you can do with Pete Werner? So there's that piece, but then there's also the conflict defender piece. We talk about this in coverage all the time. Think about you're running 4 verts against cover 3. You have one safety in the middle of the field who has 2 guys bearing down on him down the seams, and he has to make a decision. Am I going to defend the one on the left side of the field? Am I going to defend the one on the right side of the field? And the rule for the quarterback is usually that's your conflict defender. If they go right, you go left. If they go left, you go right. Same thing when it comes to a flat defender. If you have somebody in the flats, but then you have somebody else sort of running a 7 route or something that's getting a little bit more depth, if that defender plays down to the guy in the flats, you go above him to the one at the second level. If he plays back to the intermediate level, then you check down to your guy in the flats. There's the conflict defender. So we talk about it in coverage all the time, but it happens in the run game a lot too. Look at Kenneth Walker's touchdown early on in the season. You had one blocker, you had Kenneth Walker, you had one defensive back. That defensive back chose to play to the inside, kind of a 2-gap situation being replicated down the field, chose to play to the inside as opposed to playing to the outside. That allowed Kenneth Walker to get to the outside, get to the sideline, and get all the way down the field. You can look back at Miles Sanders' big touchdown from a couple of years ago with Quan Alexander making the same decision, playing toward the inside as opposed to the outside, giving him the sideline, which you cannot do. That's something that the Saints now have to be worried about in the backfield from Lamar Jackson, the guy that has the ball in his hand every single offensive snap. So that's the type of situation that the Saints defense is going to be in. And I know that sounds really drastic and really dramatic and everything like that, but I am explaining worst case scenarios here. I'm giving you examples of where it all goes wrong. When it all goes right, it just feels like a routine play. It feels like good defense. And that's what the Saints simply need to play in this game. One of the ones that I really enjoyed that Dennis Allen highlighted was the idea of playing cutback, but also quarterback. What does that mean? So think about a standard sort of zone read. You're in shotgun, or the quarterback is in shotgun. You're over on the far edge. You're the key guy, right? You're the key defender that either has to make the decision to play back or to come after the quarterback. So if you're on that back side of the play and then the run is being faked to the opposite side of you, what you're watching for is if he hands the ball off, does the pressure from the outside or does the run defense from the play side push him back to the backside? Because then you have to be there to cut off the cutoff, right? You got to be there in case that that running back decides to bounce back to the outside. But in this scenario, you also have to be aware if Lamar Jackson is keeping it, that he might be coming right towards you. So you've gone from being the backside defender to being the play side defender like that. That's the challenging part of what it is that Lamar Jackson and, as Dennis Allen highlighted, Taysom Hill does to you on a weekly basis. So there are a couple of things that the Saints can do to help themselves in this situation. The first of which is man coverage, go middle of field close. So that could be, a single high cover one type situation, but then have a spy ready at the second level. This is another place where Pete Werner could be of huge asset to you. Could also be Tyrann Mathieu. It could also be a Justin Evans. But it just depends upon if you want to go with more athleticism and speed with one of the smaller guys, or if you want to go with your secure tackler who is athletic but may not be as athletic as those guys. The good news for the Saints is Pete Werner is pretty dang athletic. So either way, you're getting your athletic tackler matched up on Lamar Jackson. So you always have a pair of eyes on him. The disadvantage is that then the rest of the defense turns their back to Lamar Jackson. So if he gets past that spy and through the defensive line, then it takes a little while before the rest of the defense is reacting to exactly what happens. Or he starts to scramble around in the backfield, eyes are on him, and then they lose track of somebody that breaks free over to the outside. You can look at this past LSU game from this weekend with the Alabama receiver that got left all by himself because eye discipline. And that's something that the Saints have struggled with in the past. They've gotten better at it so far this season, though. The other piece of it is that it does allow you, though, in terms of the advantage, it allows you to eliminate a second element for Lamar Jackson. Man coverage against the run game is usually pretty good. Man coverage, and especially what the Saints have done so far this season against those receivers, should allow them to shut them down. But you look at where it is that the Ravens have struggled so far this season, and it's a little bit more against the zone than it is against man coverage. They've thrown what did I say earlier? 3 interceptions to 2 touchdowns versus zone, but they've thrown 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions against man. So this is a wrinkle, something that you're going to want to fold in, but not something you want to live or die by. The other piece is that you can blitz or not. And the reason why I mentioned that is because that used to be the key to limiting Lamar Jackson. The Miami Dolphins put that out on blast for everybody just a couple years ago last year, to where you blitz Lamar Jackson and he kind of doesn't know what to do. He had, I think it was the 3rd lowest passer rating against the blitz that year. Now in 2022, he's been outstanding against the blitz, a 106.6 passer rating versus the blitz, as opposed to an 84.7 when he's not blitzed. So the key takeaway there is that maybe not blitzing Lamar Jackson is actually the best way to go, not only because he has performed well against the blitz, but he's also not performed great against the blitz. Out of 24 different quarterbacks that have seen 55 dropbacks so far this season without being blitzed, he's 17th out of 24. That's really low for a Lamar Jackson standard. And he's also got just something else that you'll see them fold in, a 109.6 passer rating off of play action, but only an 86.1 passer rating off of standard dropback. So if you're not blitzing him and you're not biting on the play action, or the run game isn't working, therefore they're not going to play action as much, whatever it might be, that's going to be the best way to defend Lamar Jackson. Can they do it is going to be the big question, right? So you don't want to blitz him. You're going to want to mix in some man coverage, but mainly making sure that you have eyes on him, that you have athletic tacklers that can get to him around the edge or up the middle. And as long as you can continue to force him into the middle, you're talking about eliminating 10 plays in this game at max. That's the most that Lamar Jackson has run so far this season in a single game. Those 10 plays, though, can turn into big ones. They can turn into game-deciding ones. So that's why something that also adds in as a bit of a fold, a bit of a wrinkle, that takes away the other elements, the rest of the run game with Kenyon Drake and Justice Hill, the passing game in terms of taking away the receivers. Don't give him a second outlet, right? Make him do it all by himself. But it's not just going to come down to the defense for New Orleans tonight. The offense is going to have to continue to perform the way that it has over the course of the recent past. And that means that quarterback Andy Dalton is going to have one of his best performances so far this season. And there's one specific thing that Dalton does extremely well that could end up paying dividends for the New Orleans Saints this evening. We're going to break that down as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I'm ready to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online. This is probably one of my favorite websites in the entirety of the internet. I love getting involved in betting, or even just using it as a bit of like an analytical tool to see, how teams perform as home underdogs. So for the Saints, for instance, only have one win as home underdogs so far this season, and they've been home underdogs. I think this is going to be the fifth time. This is they're a 1.5 point underdog now as this game gets closer. They opened as a 3.5 point underdog that dropped to 2.5. Now they're at 1.5. So there's been a lot of people betting on that gap. So we'll see exactly what it means for the New Orleans Saints. But if you want to get into any of this, you can follow or check everything out over at Bet Online. There's the NFL, NBA, MLB, combat sports, auto sports, esports. There's so much that you can get in on. It's over at Bet Online, your go-to number one source for all things sports wagering, more odds, lines, and props than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at what the New Orleans Saints offense needs to do against the Baltimore Ravens defense, and why Andy Dalton is going to have to play his best game of the season tonight. And the Saints are going to need that. Now, we spoke a lot throughout this episode on what the New Orleans Saints defense needs to do to limit Lamar, but of course the offense has to be able to put points up on the board as well. The good news for the New Orleans Saints is that there's a couple of things that the Baltimore Ravens do that they've excelled against so far, which is like zone coverage, for instance. The corners have been somewhere between 50 to 60% on zone coverage so far this season. So guys like Chris Olave, guys like Alvin Kamra, even a guy like Taysom Hill as a runner ends up benefiting off of that because it forces defenses to kind of drop back a little bit, watch to see how things develop. And by then Taysom Hill's like right in your face. Or Alvin Kamra getting to run those choice routes gets to take advantage of that based upon the leverage that's being created by the zone coverage ahead of him. Now, Alvin Kamra just housed 2 option routes, 2 choice routes. So expect absolutely that the Baltimore Ravens are going to key in on that. But there are other wrinkles to that too. Those are both the ones where he cuts back in sort of as the angle or Texas route. Now he might be able to bounce some stuff to the outside, which might not lead to the big plays like what we saw last week, but that will help you. And I think that that's what the Saints offense is going to do in this game. It's going to be 4 yards here, 5 yards here, 2 yards there, 4 yards here, 5 yards here, 2. Like it has to be one of those things where you simply take what it is that the defense is giving you and then be able to take advantage of some things when they present themselves. Now, whether or not Jarvis Landry plays tonight, we'll find out. I think we might find out in the middle of the day. We might not find out until an hour and a half before the game when inactives are released. But that's going to be a big one to watch. But you still have Chris Olave, who's been excellent against zone coverage. You've got Rashid Shaheed, who's been folding in more and more each game. Juwan Johnson folding in more and more each game. You're potentially getting Adam Troutman back to help your run game, but he and Andy Dalton have had a nice little connection as well. So what's one of the things that Andy Dalton does so well that the Saints are going to need to kind of go that way? Well, Baltimore Ravens pressure only 18% of the time. They're actually not that high up the board in terms of pressure rate, not as high as I expected them. The difference, so they're 8th lowest in the NFL. They're only a couple of spots ahead of the Saints in that category. The difference, though, is that when they do get pressure, they tend to get sacks. They have the 7th highest sack count so far at 23 on the season. So when they get there, they get there. It's not a lot of almost sacks when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens. So you have to limit the pressure. They also have the 13th lowest blitz percentage in the NFL as well, which is weird because Mike MacDonald, the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator is a Martindale student. He's a Wink Martindale student. You look at that New York Giants defense right now, and all that they're doing, they're blitzing. They blitz. That's what a Wink Martindale system does. So they don't blitz as much as maybe you're accustomed to, but when they do, that's how they tend to get their pressure. They don't usually get pressure with their front four. So the supplemental pass rush ends up being what it is that has a big impact. Why is that important? That's important because Andy Dalton has a 116.7 passer rating when blitzed, 4 touchdowns to 1 interception. The Saints are going to need every bit of that tonight. If Andy Dalton ends tonight's game with 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a 116.7 passer rating, you're a very happy Saints fan. He probably won't, but you're a very happy Saints fan in that case. One of the things that's going to allow them to be able to do that, though, is that they've been able to get the ball out quickly. Look at last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. They didn't have a lot of pressure coming their way in that game. Again, Andy Dalton only under pressure for 2 of those dropbacks, but they still got the ball out quickly. And that might be one of the reasons why he only got pressured 2 times. Now, Ryan Ramczyk was lights out in that game, of course, as was Cesar Ruiz, but getting the ball out quickly definitely helps. 2.38 seconds time to throw in last week's game. The Saints are going to need that when it comes to Andy Dalton as well. So those are quick developing routes. Those are, taking what the defense gives you. That's making quick decisions. That's identifying those blitz packages and getting the ball out where the pressure is coming from. The receivers, the running backs, the pass catchers, and Andy Dalton all have to be on the same page. Remember we said that Mike MacDonald, the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, was a Martindale student? So again, what that usually means is that blitzing is expected. But even if they're not blitzing at a high rate, being a Wink Martindale student also means that when you do blitz, you do it with some exotic blitz packages, some things that you're not going to see elsewhere. So the pressure packages are really, really interesting that come from this team. So you're going to see things where you're going to have to diagnose on the offensive line correctly pre-snap in order to make the play happen. And the Saints struggled with that early on in the season, so they'll need to be their latter day sort of version here over the course of the last little bit. Shout out Taysom Hill. You have to be able to take advantage of what the defense gives you in the passing game. You have to be able to protect up front. You're going to see things to where there's going to be a free safety on the line of scrimmage, and they're going to drop that free safety from the line of scrimmage all the way to being the single high safety. This is something that the Baltimore Ravens do. They do some weird stuff. And so you have to be able to take advantage of that, right? So take advantage of those moments when they present themselves in the passing game and in the run game. The Baltimore Ravens defense has been a very, very good run stopping team so far this season. So what you have to be able to do is punch, 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 and punch when it comes to that, right? You have to just wear that defense down until eventually those plays are getting broken at some point where you are starting to break those plays. Or even if you're not breaking those plays, you are in a situation to where you're showing them, hey, we're committed to the run game. Therefore, play action works. Therefore, these quick passes work, screens work, things like that. You can create some over pursuit. The Ravens right now, top 3 in the NFL when it comes to defending rushing yards, right? They've only allowed 780 rushing yards so far this season. Now, granted, they played 1 fewer game than everyone else who has played so far this weekend, but even on an on-average basis, only 4.4 yards per carry, 12th best in the NFL, while running for 5.7 yards per carry, the best in the NFL. So watch out for that run game. It's going to be a big run game day for the New Orleans Saints and the Baltimore Ravens. So that's what the Saints are going to have to do in order to get a win tonight. They're going to have to play a near perfect game in order to get it done. They did it last week. Can they do it again? We'll, of course, be here with you for the live postcast from the Caesars Superdome right after the game. We'll do about 10 to 20 minutes just kind of breaking down what happened in the game and what it means. And then we'll have our more in-depth Tuesday episode breaking things down a little bit more in-depth as we always do. So I appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out that Locked On Sports Today podcast for all the biggest stories, reactions to the biggest moments, and of course, the take of the day. You can find that on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Appreciate you so much, as always, for saying yes to me and the show, for making me a part of your day and a part of your routine. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need more around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.